This is Dendrobium alexandrae, and no new growth starting at the moment, but this new growth larger than the previous. It's a relatively young plant, and this cane is now maturing and is capable of blooming. Whether it will or not, we'll have to wait and see, but it's a nice maturing plant. I'd still class this as a young plant, and this is probably the first cane it's grown big enough to actually bloom, but we shall see. Now this little dendrobium is Nora tokunaga, or no, tokunara, one of those two, and it's not happy. I've just cut the latest growth off on the grounds it was a good strong growth. It only pushed out one leaf, and then not long after that leaf went yellow and dropped, and the new growth now, just as I've picked this up to film it, was going yellow and feeling soft. So I've cut it off. Now when you get rotting pseudobulbs and things like that, you can almost guarantee, unless you've got a fungal infection of some sort, it's just staying too wet. And I believe that because this is such a small plant, it is just that. You know, I've been watering it too often perhaps, the media's been staying wet too long in between waterings, but it's now going to get left to dry, and I mean dry, and then I'll see about watering it again. So not a happy bunny, that one, but I'll see what I can do. As I say, it was a very young plant when I got it, you know, but we'll see what we can do. Now this one is a Latoria type. It's a primary cross, Polysema crossed with Aberrans, and it should have good flowers, but we'll have to wait and see. Unflowered so far. Plenty of new growths on this, and they have a lovely pink tinge to them, so they're quite easily identified. That one's maturing, that one's maturing, and then we've got two here coming on behind, and another one round here coming on behind. So effectively 4 relatively new growths and 1 maturing. So as you can see, since I got that plant, it's almost doubled in size in a single season. Growing very well. Love it. Now this is Dendrobium rhodostictum. Relatively young plant. Latest cane is actually in bloom and has been so for a very long time. Well pleased with that. Okay, it's only a single bloom, but it's been out ages. No signs of new canes at the moment, so whether this is one of those that won't grow new growths while it's in bloom, some plants are like that, but as soon as the blooms go, it sort of triggers it into life. So we'll see what happens with that as the season progresses. I haven't had that a huge amount of time. It's a 2017 plant anyway. This one is Roy Tokunaga White Knight, and this one is doing very well. It's about to bloom. Those blooms will open soon. 2 spikes out of the same cane at the tip of the cane. This cane was mature when I've got it. This new growth was pushing on when I've got it, and this one has grown since then. So effectively 2 new growths on this one. No signs of any more at the moment, but on a plant like that, 2 new growths at once is pretty good going. I'm very happy with that one. Latoria type, obviously. Coming on nicely. This one is Dendrobium black antelope. It's my only antelope type, and I couldn't ask for more in its first year. Effectively the previously matured cane is so heavy it has to lean against something now, but 4 new growths, all pushing on really well, not matured yet, probably all capable of blooming. Maybe not all at the same time, we'll have to wait and see, but I'll be very surprised if I don't get some blooms off of those canes. So we'll have to see how that one goes, but that is growing incredibly well. But, if it's going to do that each year, I'm going to have to find some more shelf space. This is the big one I got at the start of this year, so not had it long, and it hasn't had a winter yet. It's only got 1 new growth, but what it has got is a flipping good root system. It's growing well. The cane is now over half as long as the previous canes that are nothing to do with me. They were on the plant when I got it. So we'll see how long that gets. I'd love to have had more than one growth, but that's it. That's what I've got, so that's what I've got to work with. This is also Dendrobium anosmum, but this is the semi-alba form. This plant went into the winter rest weak, and as far as I was concerned, died during the winter. And literally just sort of on the day I was about to throw it away, I saw the tiniest little show of green on one of the canes, which I thought was a flower bud, but it wasn't. So all it's done this year has grown some kikis. Now, these two Dendrobiums are being filmed together because I think they're related, but I have no proof. The tag that was on this was just fundamentally wrong because Google had never heard of that name, and that's not possible. It's not doing very well. It had a problem. It had some bugs that have damaged some leaves, but the latest leaves that are pushing up are okay. Where are we? Yeah, sort of new growth up there with reasonable leaves at the top. But it's not a happy bunny. But it does have lovely blooms on, and as long as it keeps doing that, I'll put up with what is a tatty looking plant. And talking of tatty looking plants, this is Stardust Firebird, what's left of it. I got so disgusted with the mother plant just growing kikis and looking tatty that I chucked it out basically. But I took the precaution of taking a couple of kikis off to see if it would grow properly, and it sort of is. It's pushed up a new growth here from the base. But just to be spiteful, I think, it's also pushing up a kiki. Well, the kiki's not staying on there. It will come off when it's got roots and go back in the pot where it's supposed to be. And I'll see what it does. But if it won't grow normally, I don't want it. But it does have gorgeous blooms on when it bothers. So that's those two. They sort of go together. And this was the other little plant I got from Rachel when she sent my holy pots. This is Dendrobium Comet King, one of the really nice nobly hybrids, this one. Deep, sort of pinky purple, magenta colour with yellow. Long way off blooming yet, was a single kiki, virtually no roots. Well, it's since grown some roots and it's pushed up a new growth. So, you know, it's a way off blooming yet, but it's coming on. Now, this is Dendrobium delacurii. Well, it would be if it would grow. That plant has been like that 6 months. It's done nothing. There are no signs of life on it. The leaves it had when I got it died in a very short space of time, and it grew that one new growth with those two flimsy looking leaves. That's all it's ever done. It's got hedge written all over it, that plant. So, but while those leaves are green, there is potential for growth. So I'm keeping it, but it does have a very limited lifespan, quite honestly. Now, this is Dendrobium findlayanum, and I think I messed up the blooming on this by trying to rest it and starting the rest so late in the winter that by the time it started to rest, spring arrived. And consequences of that is it didn't rest long enough and it didn't bloom. Grew a couple of nice kikis, and also as a consequence of it not starting its rest early enough, I think when it did finally come out of its rest and responded to spring, it was quite late in the season, and as a consequence it's still pushing out new growths now. But at least some of the canes, you know, are growing well for the time of year. This is Dendrobium fleckeri, relatively new acquisition again this year. Has bloomed once with a single bloom out the top of one of the canes. Latest new growth there is the longest one, basically, the one on the sort of left of the shot. At the moment that's its only new growth, and we'll see if it pushes up some more. Australian Dendrobium, this one. Right, this is Dendrobium formidable or formidable. It's a cross between Dendrobium formosum and Dendrobium infundibulum. It's not doing very well at the moment. It blooms from the top of the canes, literally from the apex, and all of the old canes have no signs of life at the top. So none of these older canes are going to bloom. So I'm totally reliant on its one new growth, which is pushing on nicely. It's got a good set of leaves on it, and it's still actively growing. We'll see where we get to with that one as the year goes on. It's Dendrobium friedrichianum. So some of these plants, they're getting so big now I can't get the whole plant in without walking halfway down the lounge, but this is a biggie. As far as progress so far this year, this has got, where are we, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 new canes, pushing on well. They tend to grow upright and then the weight gets them to lean over. Last year's canes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So where there were 5 last year, this year we've got 8. Progress. And we'll see what size those get to during the growing season. But they're not going to grow if they don't get watered and fed well. So let's keep at it and see where we get to by the end of the growing season. It's also pushed out quite a good root system this year. You see what I mean? The size of some of these things, you know. This is Dendrobium glomeratum, and this is last year's cane, yeah, right down here, that is still growing. So it hasn't finished yet. It's already, I would suggest, well over 2 feet long, 2/3 of a metre-ish. That's its old cane. A couple of very small older canes. When I got this plant, that's the sort of size I thought it was going to be, and now we've got this. Cheers. This one's playing silly buggers, basically. It's attempting to grow some new growths at the end of July. Yeah, well, that's supposed to happen in March, I believe. So those canes are going to be very late into the growing season if they're successful. It's attempting to put some new roots out as well. But I'm going to end up, if those canes are successful and they push on now at this time of year, if I rest it, I'll stop them and they won't be very big. So it's another one that can't get a proper rest this time round. I'll just do this one, Dendrobium harveyanum, literally before the last 2 of the flowers go. I don't see any more spikes for a while now, but it's been in bloom for flipping ages, so you know it's good. Wasn't doing very well in its pot, and I can't lose a plant like this that blooms so well. So I thought I'd make a change and mounted it. And we have, where is it? Ah, there it is. We have signs of life. We at least have a new growth. I'd like to see a few more than one, I must admit. Now this one up here, I'm filming it up there simply because it just happens to have some very late blooms at the moment, which are very pretty. It's Dendrobium hercoglossum, and this is not far off a continuous grower, although it's not meant to be. It's meant to be a dry winter rest type, but for me it just doesn't work like that. You can see in amongst the canes there. Yeah, see, that's a cane with leaves on that's finished growing. It's got its terminal look about it. So that cane has finished growing. But some of the other larger canes haven't. You can see there's still a new leaf coming on that cane. It's still growing. But anyway, as far as development is concerned, some of the older canes are still in active growth. They seem to take about 2.5 years before they stop growing. So they're not a single season plant. But up here are the new ones. And starting around here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And out of those new growths, some are just starting and some are already, 10 inches long. They seem to push, this one pushes, oh, there's another little one up there. This plant, for me, pushes out new growths for around 9 months of the year. So to rest this, for me, would just be stupidity. This blooms spectacularly every year. I've had it some time. It's getting bigger and bigger. If it's not broke, don't fix it. Now this little beauty is Dendrobium infundibulum crossed with Lowii, so it's a primary cross. I've only just got this, literally weeks, so I haven't had this long at all. I got it because it had blooms on it, and I like the blooms. No new growth showing at the moment. Latest cane is obviously the largest one, and it's in bloom. So we'll see how that progresses as the season goes. I hope those blooms last a long time. They're very attractive. Lovely deep gold. Anyway, we'll see how that one gets on. Well, this is Dendrobium jenkinsii, so a species, and this pushes out new growths where it flipping feels like. Most of those hanging down the bottom are new growths with their leaves open and are mature. Some of the ones sticking out to the right are new growths, they're mature. There's one brand new growth sticking up there and sort of in the middle of the shot now. Some good roots pushing out in various places. There's obviously quite an old section to this plant that's leafless with shriveled bulbs, and the new growths just pile out where and whenever they feel like it. Right, this is Dendrobium jenkinsii crossed with aggregatum, so primary cross. New growth in the bottom of the shot now, leaf just starting to open. Another new growth pushing up through the centre. Previous new growth has actually matured with an open leaf, so it just looks like the others now, but those two unopened new growths are the ones I'm watching, plus the previous two that have now matured. So I've got 4 new growths on that this year. Now this was bought earlier this year, actually in bloom as a single kiki in bloom, and it's since grown this new growth. So it is growing well, but only 1 new growth this year, and this is Dendrobium delicatum, and it has the most wonderful fragrance. But it, obviously, you know, this can grow into a massive Kingianum style plant, huge. I've seen these nearly 5 foot tall by sort of 3 foot wide, you know, with over 100 canes on them. I'm a little way off that, but at least it's grown a nice strong new growth, so it's coming on. Now, once upon a time I had a gigantic Kingianum hybrid on a mount that really did get too big for its boots and it had to go. But prior to it going, I took quite a lot of kikis off, so I've got 2 little potfuls of that, both of which are coming on. They're both growing on, but they're growing on to be sold, and ideally they'll push some spikes up in the spring and they'll be much more sellable at that point. So it's an unknown, unnamed Kingianum hybrid, and they're both off the same plant, those 2 pots. Okay, most of what's left is now kikis, but nonetheless viable plants, so they each get their turn. Mainly just see how they do. This is Dendrobium berryoda, which is a Kingianum type cross. Care for it, same as Kingianum basically. It was 3 kikis that I broke off with roots and put in a pot, and they promptly bloomed. These are the old bloom spikes. All 3 of them just bloomed as kikis, and it currently has 2 nice new growths pushing on. Excuse me, and another nice one just starting down there. So it's got active growth on it, you know, as well as the backup of the kikis. Berryoda can bloom more than once on a cane, so it's possible those older parts of this plant could bloom again next spring. You never know. Whether these will or not, I don't know. We shall see how it goes, but that's berryoda. Now, this is Dendrobium lodigesii, and strange growth habit. It tends to form mats where it grows. It does produce quite long canes. This is a youngish plant, not young but youngish, and the canes often lay across whatever it's growing and produce loads of kikis which all take root and stay there, so it forms like a clump rather than long pendulous canes like a lot of Dendrobiums. So unusual growth, new acquisition, unbloomed, growing well. Roots coming out all over the place and new growths pushing up in many places. So it's coming on well, that one. Very well. Okay, this is this weird plant that just won't grow right. It's Dendrobium lovely virgin variety Angel. And if you remember, these were the 2 kikis that I stood in a glass of water. They've opened their leaves and they've now been potted up to see what it's going to do. But if these 2 end up growing like that, they're going. However, if these push on nicely, they can stay. I don't know what I'm going to do with that. I really don't want it. We shall see. Anyway, at least the kikis are growing now, so something's happening. This is Dendrobium moniliform, variegata, hence the well, the name goes with the leaves basically, you can see why. Lovely sort of yellowish cream edges to the leaves. This one was failing badly and I remounted it and put some fresh moss on, and since then it looks better. And it has grown one new cane. That's not as big as it gets, but it looks like that's as big as that cane's going to get. I'm looking for new growths on that one. But since it was remounted, it's effectively doing okay now. And this is Dendrobium moniliform variegata again. This is the mother plant that the mounted version came off of, and it's not doing very well. Suggestion in my mind says this seems to like being mounted better than it does in a pot. All this is doing at the moment is growing kikis. 1, 2, 3. This one not quite, but these two are big enough to support themselves. I may add them to the existing mount and make a bigger plant. I may just start a new plant. I don't know yet. In fact, there's another kiki down here that I thought was a new growth, but it started part way up the cane. So this isn't a happy plant. This beastie is Dendrobium nesta, which is an anosmum cross. It grew one cane last year, which was a monster. I mean, I would say for people thinking of getting anosmum type orchids, they can get pretty damn big. So if you haven't got the space for these canes to hang, they're not the best of ideas. You can grow them staked upright, but I think they look better hanging. Anyway, one cane last year that was enormous, bloomed the whole length of the cane. This year we've got 3 new growths, 3 new canes pushing on nicely. If they don't get as big as last year's cane, to me it doesn't matter. I've got 3 this time. This is another no ID nobly hybrid. In fact, it's 2. They are one and the same. This is a piece that broke off of this when it was repotted. And it was actually an accident, not deliberate. This one's coming on nicely. It actually bloomed on that, the oldest cane. This cane's now mature and unbloomed, and it's pushed up 2 nice new growths that are pushing on. So, you know, as a little division, it's doing quite nicely. The mother plant looks quite tatty at the moment, but come the end of the year, I'll be making my decision as to what canes come off. That's going to tidy it up a bit, and it's probably just going to be these 2. But as far as new growths are concerned, none at the base at the moment, but the ones it's produced are pushing on nicely. We've got 1 there, 2, where are we? 3, 4, what have we got around here, and another 2 there, 5, 6. So I've got 6 strong new growths, all of which are currently actively growing. So they haven't reached their terminal leaf yet. They've still got more growing to do. Well, this is one of the big nobelies. At the moment still classed as a no ID, but it's highly likely it's spring dreamer pollen. This one doesn't produce lots of new growths each year, but it does produce good new growths when it does. This now is the largest cane. It's got another one here. That one's finished growing, so that's not going to get any bigger. This growth is still actively growing, so that will get bigger, and I think there's another one around the other side. Yeah, there's one pushing up through the middle there that's still actively growing. Could do with a bit of room. Yeah, so we have a mature new growth that's not full size, and then we have 3 actively growing ones, 1 bigger than all the rest, bigger than it's ever had before, and 2 pushing on behind. Now this is definitely Dendrobium spring dreamer pollen. It's a nobly type, and it's a proper named one, and I thought that was going to be a kiki, but it's not. It's going to be buds. So once those buds come out, I can positively identify my big version as this and give it a proper name. It's highly likely, but until this one opens its blooms, I need to do a direct comparison. There are a lot of nobly hybrids. To give one a name, I want to be sure. But it's growing well. I mean, that's a lovely strong new growth. Present from Rachel, that one. Right, so this little group are my Phalaenopsis type Dendrobiums. There's 3 no IDs there and 1 with an actual name. So we do the named one first. This is a Dendrobium Thai Angel. Looking at the plant at the moment, this was its last growth, this is its latest growth, and only new growth actively growing at the moment. So that's Thai Angel. This one is just a no ID. It has a good strong new growth here, and it's just started another one at the base and is currently in bloom on with a spike out of one of each of two of the older canes. Okay, and the other two no IDs haven't bloomed for some time, and this one certainly looked as though it was failing at one point, but it's picking up. I mean, effectively, the fact that they're no IDs, obviously when we get to film them again, we'll need to know what's going on. But the three new growths are all round one side of the plant on this one, so it's quite easily identified. I've got one each side there, a small one coming up in the centre, and what looks like a kiki pushing up there, or something's going on up there. I'm quite sure what. This one is the better plant and has some good strong new growths pushing out. Again, this one didn't look too happy on the older bulbs, but since the new growths have started, you know, eventually those old bulbs will drop their leaves. They got bugs on them, I think, at some point, but it's coming on. I mean, we've got 1, 2, 3, another small one there, at least 4 new growths on that one. Well, this Nobly is just getting too big for its boots. You can see, I mean, I'm literally arched over backwards over my watering bowl to try and get the plant in. It is just getting so big. But it blooms well. This is Prima Donna, has lovely yellow blooms with little pink tinges in places. It's beautiful. So it can get as big as it likes, quite honestly. But this year, as opposed to last year, I thought it did well. This year it's going mad in comparison. These are huge canes and they're still growing. They're still at it. They will finish eventually, but as long as they keep going. So if we start from the label, otherwise I won't know where I get back to. 1, 2, there's nothing growing at the base at the moment. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 canes growing on that. Now this is another primary cross. This is Dendrobium farmeri crossed with Griffithianum. I was beginning to get a bit worried about this plant simply because it's running out of nodes to bloom on. This cane's still got 2 that can possibly bloom this year. There's a few more dotted around, but it's slowly but surely using them up, and there were no new growths. But it's finally got its act together and pushed 1 up, singular. But at least it's a new cane. Bearing in mind it can bloom 2 or 3 spikes per cane, not necessarily all in the same year. So at least it's got a new growth now. Now this is Dendrobium primulinum. This does have a nice annual cycle. It pushes out new canes, nice leaves, puts on some good strong growth, and then normally during its resting period it drops those leaves and then in the spring replaces them by blooms. That's the traditional winter rest style of growth. It's pushing out some good new roots from its 3 new canes. So that's the size of them now. They're obviously going to be bigger than that by the end of the year, but how much bigger, we'll have to wait and see. This is Dendrobium senile, or senile as I call it. Recent acquisition to replace a lost plant. Turned out to be lots of small plants and not one big one, but the greenery on there is staying green. The largest cane is pushing on that leaf. Although there's plenty of green, there's not a lot of growth going on, and very poor roots on all of those pieces. Although that's a drier winter rest type, it's not getting one. That's got to be looked after and nurtured to get a good root system and some strong new growths before I even think about blooming it. My previous one did bloom, but I lost that in the winter. Just didn't come out the other end, basically. So hopefully we'll look after this one. This is my Victoria Reginae. and I thought that was going to be a flower spike, and it's decided to be a kiki, which once it's got some roots is coming off and going straight back in the pot. The pot is a pot full of kikis, that's how I bought it, so it's not a single plant, there's several plants in here. But there are still signs of nubbins on that cane. But if it decided to do a kiki with that one, it might do the same with those two. They might be buds. We'll have to wait and see. But I'm pretty certain that the normal blooming pattern for this orchid is on canes where the leaves have dropped. I have seen blooms on leaved canes, but normally they are on the bare canes. So the chances are, if it's going to do some blooming, it's going to be next year. But it's growing on quite well. It has no brand new growths down the base, but these were new growths once, they're now maturing, as is this one. So doing okay. Now this one is Dendrobium wedding bells, which is classed as a nobly type, but it's a slightly unusual nobly type because it doesn't bloom in early spring, it blooms in late spring. Which is good. It's good because it means there's one of the larger dendrobiums in bloom after the others are starting to go over. So it works well. This is a new cane maturing. Got another new cane pushing on here, another new cane pushing on here, and another one here. And round the other side, again, one large matured cane, terminal leaf. Yep. So it's growing well. There's no brand new growths at the moment, but it's pushed up quite a few new growths this year. So hopefully when those mature towards the end of this year, they will be next year's blooms, and it will probably, you can see obviously there was a cane that bloomed well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spikes, but it's still possible it can bloom farther down the nodes. Yeah. So we'll see what it does next year, but it was a really good blooming this year. I was well pleased. If it does the same next year, I'll be over the moon. Somewhere near it would still be good. Okay, that's the end of the Dendrobium section. That was hard work, just physically on the grounds that the plants are all over the place. But if I've missed any, obviously I can go back and film them and slot them in, but I won't know until I put the clips together and go down with my notes and the clips, ticking them off as I go. But hopefully I've got them all. The only other really large section will be the Oncidiums and intergenerics that go in that set, which is going to hold me up again, but I've got lots to do in between because this is D and they are O. So there's lots of things come in between those that I can get on with. So that's the Dendrobiums.